Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Bacon, and I'm the National Elder Justice Coordinator at the Department of Justice. And as many of you know, Attorney General Barr has made protecting America's seniors from fraud a top priority of the department. DOJ is bringing more cases, we're conducting more outreach, and developing more partnerships than ever before. In fact, in March, General Barr announced the largest elder fraud sweep in U.S. history, eclipsing the two prior record-breaking sweeps. We charged more than 400 defendants for causing over $1 billion in loss in fraud schemes. And folks, these fraud schemes mostly affected seniors. While we're excited to say that the newly formed Transnational Elder Fraud Strike Force brought cases against more than 140 of these defendants, this was truly a nationwide effort, with every single U.S. attorney's office throughout the country participating. And as this slide demonstrates, some of the smaller offices had some of the biggest impact. At the same time, General Barr also launched a new elder fraud hotline to help seniors who become victims of fraud connect with resources they need to pick up the pieces. If you take one thing away from my remarks, please make it be this slide and this phone number and share it with your networks. 1-833-FRAUD-11, just like 911. Now, these are truly laudable efforts, but fraudsters are not stopping, and neither is DOJ. When the corona pandemic spread, fraudsters immediately began exploiting this international tragedy and seizing it as an opportunity to prey on the fears of senior citizens. As Lois highlighted, they offered fake tests, fake cures, fake help offering Social Security stimulus or other types of stimulus funds, all with the intent to rob this vulnerable population, our nation's seniors, during a time of crisis. The scammers are ruthless. They use fierce scare tactics to threaten, harass, and even frighten the elderly into parting ways with their hard-earned savings. It's true, fraudsters are working overtime, but so is DOJ. It's truly fitting I'm following Lois because the FTC has been such a critical source of information for the Department of Justice on emerging scams. Every single time a consumer enters a complaint, it's a clue. The clues add up, and they paint a picture of how transnational criminal organizations are working nationwide to defraud seniors. The more of you out there who file complaints, and importantly, the more states out there who contribute their data to FTC's Consumer Sentinel, the more clues DOJ has in order to better detect and dismantle these transnational criminal organizations that are running these large-scale fraud schemes. Many of you know Gus Eiler and Rich Goldberg at our Consumer Protection Branch, who are really leading the department's efforts to study the data and work with the FBI to identify the critical networks. Now, because the transnational criminal organizations are located overseas, they need a way to get into seniors' living rooms. So how do they do that? Well, one of the primary ways is through robocalls. It's cheap, it's easy, it's effective. And when COVID-19 started to spread, fraudsters used robocalls to perpetrate their schemes. Call centers overseas that used to target seniors, for example, with grandparent scams or government imposter scams, basically just rewrote their scripts. Instead of claiming to need money for bail for a grandchild who was arrested, now they claim to need money for a grandchild who needed COVID-19 treatment. Or fraudsters started posing as religious leaders, asking for money for victims, or purporting to offer financial assistance like grants from even some really well-known organizations like the World Health Organization. DOJ's been focusing on fraudulent robocalls because think about it. No calls means less fraud, means fewer victims. And our efforts are working. You might have noticed fewer robocalls as of late. And if you have, it's because of the DOJ's Consumer Protection Branch and our Elder Fraud Strike Force up in Eastern District of New York, who took landmark actions to shut down two of the nation's largest facilitators of fraudulent robocalls. One of these companies carried 720 million calls during just a sample 23-day period. And as this slide shows, every single state was bombarded. Look at Florida with 13 million calls in just a 7-day period. We are continuing to step up efforts to stop fraudulent robocalls, and earlier this year formed the Traced Act Working Group, which brings together leading experts in robocall regulation and enforcement. And many of the folks who are here on this call today and are members of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. We are engaging in regular outreach with US Telecom, which is an industry group representing the telecommunications industry, to further identify fraudulent robocall campaigns that take advantage of the COVID-19 crisis to scare victims, especially the elderly. Working together, we have identified new campaigns in real time, and that's allowing us to take action quickly to stop. But really, unfortunately, some calls are still getting through. And that means seniors, far too many seniors, are becoming victims and they're sending money to fraudsters. But since the fraudsters are overseas, they need to get their money out of the country. Two common ways they're doing it: gift cards, as mentioned earlier, and money mules. If you don't know what a money mule is, this should be the second takeaway. Learn about money mules and learn how to stop them. Together with the Postal Inspection Service, and Chief Barksdale has been a huge leader and champion of this effort. We all owe him thanks in this effort. And including our partners in the private sector, including the American Bankers Association and the financial industry, we have been working to dismantle the money mule networks, the underground banking system that's funneling the money overseas, taking money out of U.S. bank accounts and sending it to the cartels. Last fall, we took efforts to stop over 600 money mules, and they're operating in every state all over the country. Our work continues. This wasn't just last fall. In fact, recently out of Wisconsin, Emmanuel Odaya, a citizen of Nigeria, was sentenced to 54 months in prison for laundering over $500,000 in connection with a scheme that targeted the elderly. And in March, our strike force in Georgia arrested 24 people for their alleged involvement in a large-scale operation that involved more than $30 million in loss from a number of scams, including romance fraud and retirement account scams. Folks, these networks are operating today, and right now, money mule networks are sending COVID fraud proceeds from American seniors to fraudsters overseas. And that's why we're all working overtime to dismantle these networks. But prosecution is only half the equation. And General Barr has made it our mission to focus on prevention as well as prosecution. Since the onset of COVID-19, our elder justice coordinators have been stepping up their outreach to seniors, warning them of scams and reminding them to be particularly diligent when providing their personal information or making payments online. While outreach has been a challenge due to social distancing, our EJCs are creative, they're diligent, they're committed. For example, in Northern Ohio, the U.S. Attorney's Office partnered with county government, grocery stores, and retailers who sell gift cards to display this Scam Squad gift card alert sign in places where gift cards are sold. And the next slide demonstrates that the Northern District of Georgia U.S. Attorney's Office and a local nonprofit, the North Georgia Elder Abuse Task Force, partnered to create coronavirus scam notices, and this is pretty neat, distributed it to over 3,000 seniors through Meals on Wheels in a partnership with the Northwest Georgia Area Agency on Aging. So these are 3,000 seniors who have this notice in their house and can be on high alert. I'm really proud of the work of our 93 elder justice coordinators, our elder fraud strike forces, our law enforcement partners, our private sector partners. And as you can see, all of this effort collectively, we're really making a difference.
Good morning. My name is Gary Barksdale, Chief Postal Inspector. So good morning, Assistant Secretary Robinson and members of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to share a few updates about the work that the Postal Inspection Service is conducting. First, I'd like to thank Assistant Secretary Robinson for his leadership, and particularly his decision to host this meeting despite the challenges we're facing with COVID, because as you said in the beginning, the scammers are not stopping due to COVID. In fact, as you heard from Attorney Bacon, it actually created additional opportunities for them to come up with additional scams to address our elderly. So first, recently the Department of Justice requested that the Inspection Service play a key role in its COVID-19 fraud task forces. Postal inspectors have been very busy investigating schemes related to fake cures and treatments, along as economic impact payment, as well as a host of government imposter scams. Obviously, this is on top of pursuing criminals that weave a coronavirus theme into their traditional schemes, such as romance, technical support, and the one that I absolutely hate the most is relative and distress scams. The Department of Justice has also asked us to investigate instances of hoarding and price gouging of N95 masks, surgical gowns, and ventilators. You know that these instances of hoarding and price gouging often have a direct and indirect effect on our older Americans. We currently have postal inspectors on dozens of task forces across the country, from New York to California. I am pleased to report, however, that these partnerships are yielding results. Postal inspectors in New York recently investigated a Long Island businessman who grossly inflated the price of N95 masks and protective gowns that he sold to individuals and organizations that serve senior citizens and children battling the coronavirus. Our investigation led to one of the first persons in the U.S. to face price gouging charges under the Defense Production Act. Around that same time, following an investigation, federal prosecutors charged a Michigan man for perpetrating a COVID-related scam against the public. And in late March, following a postal inspection-led investigation, federal prosecutors charged a suspect in the Northern District of Georgia for selling a dangerous pesticide as a prevention treatment for COVID-19. Although I won't go into detail, it is worth mentioning again, as Attorney Bacon mentioned, the landmark enforcement action that took place earlier this year when DOJ filed to stop telecarriers who facilitated hundreds of millions of fraudulent robocalls placed to consumers. This, I believe, was a first of its kind action that telecom carriers for years have facilitated foreign-based fraudulent call centers. So those civil actions has made a difference. Another civil action filed by the Department of Justice followed an investigation led by the Social Security Administrative Office of the Inspector General. Investigative support was also provided by the U.S. Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, Homeland Security's El Dorado Task Force, and the United States Secret Service. The FTC and FCC also provided pertinent data. The case was handled by the Civil Division's Consumer Protection Branch in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York. These actions are important not only for demonstrating the benefits of collaboration, but for the wide-reaching effects of addressing the legal robocalls before they enter the United States telephone system, before they ring the phone lines of our consumers. We need additional broad solutions like this that go well beyond warning the public to just hang up. On a final note, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues for their support and collaboration on this very, very important issue.
Hello, I am Michael Herndon, Deputy Assistant Director for the Office for Older Americans in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Next slide, please. For this written disclosure, please know that I am making my own remarks and opinions that don't necessarily reflect that of the CFPB or its staff. The remarks also do not constitute legal counsel in any form. Next slide, please. What is possible with COVID-19 related imposter scams might really surprise you. As you can read here, imposter scams can get very sophisticated, even going as far as impersonating a specific individual at an agency and not just the agency overall. In this case, described on this page, our own assistant director for the Office for Old Americans was named by the fraudsters. They even suggested the persons that they were targeting to look me up on their website, and as CFPB's has public leadership profiles. Generally, the CFPB enforces the law relating to consumer financial products and services. That's primarily the lending of money, such as mortgages, credit cards, payday and student loans, services like checking accounts and money transfers. Even though in this instance the fraudsters invoked CFPB, this type of scam would have fallen under the FTC's or the state attorney general's jurisdiction and not CFPB's. Next slide, please. But there are instances where that an imposter scam would fall under the CFPB's jurisdiction. And the case that I want to raise your attention to is in October of 2017, the CFPB filed a suit against two companies operating under the same name, FDAA, service provider, and their owners for falsely representing that FDAA was affiliated with the federal government. The CFPB also alleged that FDAA's so-called debt validation programs violated the law by falsely promising to eliminate consumers' debts and improve their credit scores in exchange for thousands of dollars in advance fees. The court entered default judgment against all of the defendants in May 2018, and the order bans the defendants from providing debt relief or credit repair services to consumers and requires them to pay millions in redress and civil penalties. So you can imagine yourself what agencies might be mimicked with COVID-19, even just not necessarily specific impersonating, but just associating themselves and making it look similar to another agency. Next slide, please. So in addition to these enforcement actions, the CFPB also has consumer response and education as part of its mission, and imposter scams are addressed within those functions. If a consumer has a problem with a financial product or service, they should reach out to the company first, but then they can, companies usually can answer questions on the unique situations and be more specific about the products and services they offer. But if the individual does want to continue to file a complaint, they can do so at consumerfinance.gov/complaint. You can also refer consumers to our complaint portal if they believe there might be a debt relief scam involved. That can be helpful to our supervision and enforcement team as they track these trends and use the data to prioritize. The next slide, please. And when it comes to imposter scams, part of our educational efforts, you'll see here in talking about Social Security scam, we have a meal site service placemat service as well. We have hundreds of thousands of these placemats have been ordered and are in the homes and senior centers and other settings across the country. They help us to, these enforcement actions help us to determine what kinds of educational materials we need to create, like the Social Security scam. This educational piece actually came from a collaboration with the Federal Trade Commission and Social Security Administration. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to highlight two resources for you. One is the page CFPB created to address the impact of the coronavirus. The CFPB is committed to providing consumers with up-to-date information and resources to protect and manage their finances during this difficult time. Visit consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus to find more information on topics such as fraud, housing, credit, and debt. And the other resource I wanted to mention today, it's not on the slide, but it's something that we're just releasing today. It's an Elder Fraud Prevention and Response Networks Development Guide. It's a resource that can help communities come together and address financial exploitation. So visit consumerfinance.gov/eldernetworks. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this information today.
All right, thank you, Michael. That's a great announcement kind of in your report on. We hope that a lot of communities take advantage of access to that guide. That's fabulous. So again, thanks to Lois, to Tony and Gary and Michael. Again, I thought each presentation succinct, highly informative. I do want to go ahead and take an opportunity to see if we have any questions from council members for any of our four colleagues who served on the panel. Your line is now hot, so you'll just have to unmute yourself and go ahead and jump in.
Hi, this is Louisa Equipment at the Treasury Department. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I don't have a question as much as a comment, which is just to note that on behalf of the Treasury Department, we certainly appreciate all of the assistance from all of the agencies in their support on getting those economic impact payments out. And a number of the agencies that have presented really helped the department in making sure that consumers knew about how to get their economic impact payments, how to go to the IRS.gov website, and also preventing people from being defrauded on that. So we really appreciate the partnership from the Federal Trade Commission, from the CFPB, and from the Social Security Administration and Veterans Administration to really help us in getting those out to everybody. So the Department of Treasury has issued about 160 million payments, economic impact payments. It's a huge job. And while a lot of it fell on the IRS, it certainly could not have been done without all of those partners. So I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the Treasury Department.
All right, great. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions for the panel? Let me then jump in. I've got a question for Tony. Tony, we were all excited when the Attorney General launched the National Elder Fraud Hotline. Just curious if you can tell us a little bit more about that. Who staffs that hotline? Is it open 24 hours a day? Any sort of data around number of calls? Anything you might want to share with the council at this point?
Thanks, Lance. I really appreciate that question because we are excited about the hotline and excited to offer more resources to seniors and their families who might have fallen victim to one of these scams. The hotline is staffed 24/7, 365, and it is staffed with experienced counselors who can listen to seniors and help direct them to the appropriate resources that they might need, whether in their community, whether statewide, whether federally. So they are a kind of a one-stop shop, so to speak, for seniors who might be victims or family members who are calling on behalf of a senior who is a victim to try to get the help that they need. So we really encourage people to use the hotline. The questions help us also in developing other victim services or in identifying what ways can we improve our outreach.
Okay, great. And Tony, any thoughts on usage? I don't know if you have numbers with you, obviously, but have we seen a decent usage for the phone line, the hotline?
We have. I don't have the exact numbers here, but we have seen a use and we have seen an increase, sadly. Ideally, there would be no calls to the hotline because there would be no fraud and there would be no seniors defrauded. But at the same time, we're really glad to see that word is getting out about the hotline and that people are getting the help that they need if they do fall victims to one of these ruthless scammers.
Absolutely. And I like the little postings around where you can buy gift cards, kind of warning purchasers that, you need to clearly understand what this purpose is. Is it potentially for fraudulent activity?
Well, we were really inspired by the research that was done and explained in the first panel that shows that something as small as a sign that doesn't cost a lot of money, doesn't require a lot of training, could actually make a big difference. And that's why our elder justice coordinators are so passionately going out to retailers and trying to see if more would be willing to join in and do their part to help protect seniors.
All right, very good. Thank you. One last offer. Any questions from panel members before we move on? Council members? Okay, hearing none. I will, you've already written it down, but I'm going to state it one more time. If you do have any questions, both council members and members of the public who are watching, you can email us at EJCC@ACL.HHS.gov. Again, we hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity. So again, thank you so much to the panel who just presented. Highly informative, great information. Thank you so very much for the work that you do each and every day. We want to now pivot and have a couple of different presentations from individuals who are going to talk about prevention strategies. So again, we're talking about financial exploitation prevention training. And we have, like I said, a couple of different speakers with us today who are going to talk about some activities they're involved in, starting off with a colleague from AARP. So as you'll note, Jolene Gunther is the National Director of the AARP BankSafe initiative. And again, we're excited. I know a little bit about that. I'm excited to hear a bit more. So again, with that, I want to turn it over to Ms. Gunther. Thank you for joining us. You have about 10, 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lance. Really excited to be here with you today to talk about something that's a key project for ARP in preventing financial exploitation, but also something that I have a personal stake in. And let me tell you why. My grandfather spent about 40 years in the financial industry. Before that, and while he was doing that, he spent a lot of time in the community, from raising foster kids to sponsoring refugees to help starting the foundation of a large university in his state. And it was in his 90s that our family discovered that he was being financially exploited. Someone was taking cash from his wallet. And my uncle, who is a banker, saw the red flags of exploitation. And our family decided to set a trap, of course, using die packs, because who else has access to die packs other than bankers? And for those who are listening online, the die packs, basically, if you've watched CSI, it's basically powder so that if you touch the cash, it puts a die on your hand. So it literally, we caught the thieves red-handed. Now, my grandfather was lucky in the fact that we caught the exploitation. We come from 3 generations of community bankers. But other victims are not as lucky. Next slide. And next slide. The average victim loses about $120,000. With that, what we're also seeing is that financial institutions also lose about $1 billion a year due to this type of crime. Next slide. And beyond that, we're also seeing other costs. Victims of exploitation also are looking to public assistance after being exploited. And caregivers are picking up an average of $36,000 in direct costs due to exploitation. And you can read more about this in a paper I wrote called The Thief Who Knows You, The Cost of Elder Exploitation Examined. Next slide. So with that, one of the questions was, who are the perpetrators? And that's where it really comes into really the ultimate betrayal, is that the majority of them are family members. If we look at the studies that are out there, about 60 to 90% of perpetrators are family members. And the other thing that's concerning too is if you look at the amount of money that's being stolen per case, is that family members steal twice as much money than strangers. Strangers usually do it's usually a one dip into that money bucket. But family members tend to steal over a length of time, and that amounts to, at the end, about twice as much as strangers. Next slide. And what we're seeing is the problem's only getting worse. As we see a rise in the population, we also see an increase of the number of complaints by those over the age of 60. Next slide. So how are people, what is the method to their exploitation? Because if we know that, then we can help prevent some of that. And if you look at the common ways they access money, family members typically use financial institutions. Strangers typically rely more so on multi-service businesses. And then if you look at the costly methods, what you're seeing too is that similarity is that one of the ways the costly method is by going through their accounts. And so next slide. One of the areas that we look at is working with financial institutions to empower them to prevent this. I think that's both what kind of Emma and Michael said earlier in the presentation, is just how the front lines can put a stop to the financial exploitation. So one of the first things we did, what ARP is really great at with our 38 million members, is we surveyed people over the age of 50 that have accounts at a financial institution to see if they would be open to their financial institutions helping them in a variety of different matters. We asked about 20 different variables, from getting help from one-on-one retirement advice, accessibility issues, to even getting those popular discounts on products and services. And one of the top things they said they prefer is one of the easiest things to provide. They wanted the financial institution employees to be highly trained to detect and prevent exploitation. And they wanted this more than those discounts, because consumers know that protecting their money far outweighs the value of a discount on a product and service. We also asked the question in the survey if they've ever been financially exploited, and if they lost money from it, and how their financial institution handled the situation. And then we asked a question about their trust. Trust is a foundational principle of the financial industry. And what we saw was that people's consumers' trust increased about 41% based on how their financial institution handled that exploitation situation. Next slide. So how do we get ahead of the problem? And that's really having real action before the money leaves the account. Next slide. And one of the easiest ways to do that our consumers said, but also that the industry said as well, as we pulled in roundtables, as they said, it's really through training and education that we can work together to prevent this type of exploitation from that money leaving the account. Next slide. So one of the things we set out to do is really to develop a training that was comprehensive, and really key to this was collaboration. We wanted to do this, my background is working at the state level in communities, and we wanted to do this outside the Beltway and really get into the heart of communities to help us build the content and test it. So we worked in 11 different states across the country, and we developed this training with over 200 financial experts, from CEOs of community banks and credit unions, to tellers, fraud risk managers, to adult protective services, to local state aging agencies. And then we tested it with the industry with 2,000 financial industry employees in a pilot. Next slide. So what does this training look like? It is a 60-minute interactive online training that employees from banks and credit unions can take either in one sitting, or they can do it at their own pace. One of the things that people on the front line said was that they're very busy and they don't always have 60 minutes to sit and take a training. So we made a training that's in bite-sized pieces so people can go in and out as much as they want. The other thing that it does, it enables staff to really put knowledge to the test through interactive scenarios, games, and quizzes, where a lot of other trainings look at identifying what the problem is, identifying financial exploitation, and then reporting it. What we spend a tremendous amount of time is really building the confidence and the skills to know what to do when they see it so they can stop it. Throughout the training, there is a lot of variety. There's over 20 activities, bite-sized exercises, video, audio, so it can really fit into the busy schedules of those frontline staff members. Next slide. So one of the things, because this is central to ARP's mission to protect the financial resiliency of older adults, and we make this training free to banks and credit unions across the country, is we wanted to really measure the effectiveness of the BankSafe training. And so what we did is we engaged with Virginia Tech's Center on Gerontology to conduct a study. And with that, a really groundbreaking study that involved over 500 branches of banks and credit unions across the nation. In that study, there was 1,800 employees, frontline staff, that took and completed the BankSafe training. And it was a scientific random process. So we had about 1,000 people that took the BankSafe training, and then we had the control group that didn't take the training. They took a one-pager on customer service skills. What I want to note here, which is important, is that the majority of the sample in both the intervention group that took the BankSafe training and the control group that didn't had taken some other type of financial exploitation prevention course within that last year. Next slide. And we really wanted to know the answers to three important questions. Does the BankSafe training increase knowledge? More importantly, does the BankSafe training increase confidence? I can read a book about how to change a carburetor. It does not mean that I'm going to be confident in changing a carburetor. Lastly, and groundbreaking, is does the BankSafe training group, did they save consumers money? And through this, we did pre and post tests. We also had a survey that was 9 questions that if they saw suspected financial exploitation, they had to fill it out. Next slide. So here are the results. Does the BankSafe training increase knowledge? Next slide. What we know is that it did. Post-test scores improved 133% compared to increases with the control group of 33%. Next slide. Again, that important question of confidence. Did it increase their confidence, which then leads to actual intervention? Next slide. What we know is that it did. It increased confidence 4 times as much as those who didn't take the training. Next slide. And then this really the heart of the study and of the BankSafe training is, did the BankSafe training group save consumers money? And the results were staggering. What we saw was that exploitation was reported 4 times as high than those in the control group. Next slide. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that the BankSafe training group saved a significant amount of money, 16 times more than the control group. In 6 months, they saved about $1 million. Next slide. So what Virginia Tech concluded was that we met our goal, really resulting in significantly higher financial savings and substantially higher reporting of financial exploitation. Next slide. Because we did this study, we can actually forecast, based on the fact that we released this training nationally about a year ago, we can basically say that we better protected 7 million consumers based on those frontline people who have taken the course in the last year, and that we've actually prevented from getting in the hands of perpetrators $17 million. Next slide. So people ask me, they're like, what is the secret sauce to the effectiveness of the BankSafe training and the social impact that you've seen here today? And there are kind of 5 key areas. From designing for industry impact to leveraging ARP's brand to accomplish these things. Next slide. The first thing is really designing for impact. One of the things we wanted to do in this training is we wanted to build empathy with those that are taking it, and we do this through videos and activities. One of the first things they learn about is they hear from a family member of a victim of how it impacted her life, her father's life, and her entire family, to really build on the empathy and pull those heartstrings. But they also hear from their peers that they can make a difference. Rather than hearing from ARP, we wanted them to hear how other people had done this successfully and stopped that exploitation. We also wanted to create positive messaging. There is, as we all know, when people talk about victims, unfortunately, sometimes they say, well, you're a victim because you didn't know this, or because you're not bright. And what we do in this is we create positive messaging, that this is about perpetrators being really good at what they do, that they do this 24/7. The other thing we did, which I kind of mentioned before, is we really emphasize the action steps and building skills. What do you do when you see it? What are the effective questions, probing questions? What are the most effective ways and methods to actually stop that money from ever leaving the account? And then the other thing that we do is we use the best e-learning principles for an interactive training. As you can see here, we've won, it says 5 awards, but an update is we just received another 2 awards. So it's a 7 multi-award winning training. Next slide. The other thing is that we look at proving an industry business case. We really wanted the industry to hear from their peers on why they're doing this. So we did a qualitative study, not only in the United States, but across the globe, from different financial institutions that were in this space and were making a difference. And we asked them, what is it? Why are you in this space? What is it? What's the business justification? And what we heard was that it helps with reputational risk. It creates stronger customer and member relationships. It's something that their employees like to do. They want to contribute to the greater good. We heard from Barclays Bank in the UK that it increases their brand distinction. And then it also can help save money, as well as meeting that important regulatory guidance. Next slide. The next thing that was really a key to part of the success is really the collaborative process. We wanted to engage with the industry to make voluntary changes. ARP is not a regulator, so in that way, we really wanted to encourage them. And by doing so, we really wanted to make it easy and really free to implement. And I like to give this analogy of, recycling 20 years ago was a little bit challenging. But now I'll recycle because some ingenious person put a garbage can with 2 wheels by the side of my door. And if we can make it easy by providing that training and that it's free so there are no barriers to doing the right thing, it's easier and it is more likely to be adopted. And then we also took the industry along with us. This is really important to AARP, which is really developing this in partnership with the industry. To develop this, we did over 20 workshops. We had 200 industry people review this, and then we had 2,000 industry employees testing the training in a pilot. Next slide. The next thing we wanted to do was really use the industry distribution networks. We really found that trade associations were our key partners in the training distributions, the Credit Union National Association, the Independent Community Bankers of America, as well as state credit union leagues and state banking associations. And that really, as they say, is really a value add for something they can offer their association members. And it also is more effective in using their distribution lines out to their banks and credit unions rather than AARP going from bank to bank to credit union to credit union. Next slide. The next thing we wanted to do was really leverage AARP's brand to scale for that social impact. We know that 60% of consumers will listen to AARP on which institutions are proactive in preventing exploitation. And to really provide that carrot and incentive, if 80% of the front lines at a bank or credit union take the course, and also confirm that they have a policy report exploitation externally, and that they're in good standing, they are allowed to use a BankSafe train seal on their website. Next slide. And one of the things from using these kind of 5 key marks is that we're seeing the results. We're getting praise for this award-winning training from, we had a CEO of a large financial institution say that this is the gold standard in the industry, to that this really has the fingerprints and approvals of banks all across the country. Next slide. And with that, because of these 5 principles, that's why we're seeing the impact that we're seeing today, that in a year's time, we've been able to save $17 million from going to in the hands of perpetrators and being kept in the pockets of older adults where they belong, and then better protecting 7 million consumers. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Jillian, we want to see now if we have any questions from council members before we go to the last presenter. I'll entertain a question if anyone has any. And again, the great work that AARP is doing, known for really being innovative. So thank you. Really appreciate it. All right, let's then go ahead now and call on our last speaker. We have Rhonda Kent with us. Rhonda is with the Bureau of the Fiscal Service at the Department of Treasury. And again, she is our second presenter, focusing on how do we protect the delivery of federal benefits payments, which we all know is a very, very popular topic right now. So Rhonda, we're anxious to hear from you. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lance, and thank you to the council for inviting me here today. I'm really happy to be here. Just so I do a time check, what time would you like me to end? I do have a little video at the end that's about a minute. I want to make sure we have time to share that. Oh, I can't hear you, Lance. I didn't hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, my team muted me, which I'll get them for that. Let's shoot for 11:25, which gives you 12 minutes.
Sure. Perfect. Okay, I can do that. I can talk fast, even though, like the other speakers, we could talk all day about how we are all working so hard to protect the elderly as well as other recipients of federal benefits. And so the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, we can go to the next slide, is a Bureau of the Department of Treasury and works very closely on the financial management activities of the federal government. So we are behind the scenes for many federal agencies in a number of areas. We support the raising of funds to finance the government. We raise trillions of dollars through auctions. We support the financial infrastructure to collect revenues that are owed to the government. We work with multiple banks. We collect delinquent debt, receivables. We do the centralized accounting for the government. And many of those financial transactions that happen on a day-to-day basis that impact millions of Americans every day, we operate those backroom operations. And my business line in particular is the payments, the outgoing payments that the government makes. So we work with more than 250 federal entities to disperse payments, keeping in mind these critical kind of tenets that we think each American citizen expects from their government. They expect that the government is an efficient steward of their financial resources, the financial information provided is accurate, and most importantly, when we talk about payments, that their financial interactions with the government are modern, seamless, and secure. So going to the next slide. So our role in the delivery of payments, as I said, we work with more than 250 federal entities to disperse almost 90% of the government's payments. And so that could be your tax refund, your Social Security benefit, salaries for federal employees, vendor payments, any type of outgoing payment that you can think of. So we work with the IRS, who delivers a tax refund, and most recently the economic impact payments, which I'll touch on a little bit. IRS determines how much people are entitled to, who's getting it, what the payment mechanism is, and then the Bureau of the Fiscal Service effectuates those instructions from the IRS or whoever that paying agency is. These payments total in fiscal year 19, close to $4 trillion. The key thing that I want to focus on is the efforts that we've been doing over the last 40 years since direct deposit came into being to make as many of those payments, disperse as many of those payments as possible electronically. And we'll talk about why and how that does support the fraud prevention techniques that we're talking about here today. So I'll talk a little bit about how we've reached the 95%, and for benefit payments, it's even higher in a minute. Our payments, we use a variety of payment mechanisms. While most of them are done through direct deposit, we also use checks. We use FedWire. We deliver payments around the world. We're in 248 countries using 146 different currencies. The next slide. This is just a small depiction of some of the citizens that we serve. And as we talk this through, and you'll see when we end with the video, what I want people to take away about our Bureau and the payments business line is each and every person, it's ingrained in their culture that they recognize that every payment equals an individual and their family and what those payments mean, especially when we're talking about the lifeline benefit payments that we deliver, the veterans payments, the food and nutrition payments that we deliver to states so they can support families. So just keep in mind that I know when our employees want every payment to get there accurately to the right person. They don't want to see any fraud involved. And it really is important to them, each and every individual that is receiving one of the payments that we deliver. The next slide. This is just a little depiction timeline of how our Bureau has evolved with the payment industry. If you're involved in the payment industry at all, you're a payment geek a little bit like I am, you do know that it's not an easy thing to deliver payments. It seems simple, but it's not. And we have, over the years, added a wide variety of payment mechanisms to our pocketbook, so to speak. So some of you might be familiar with Venmo and Cash App and some of these other things, that the kids are using. But what we try to do is we try to be aware of the evolving technology and implement it where we can. At the same time, we also have to be aware that we're serving a wide swath of the American public. And we have to make sure that we have ubiquity, that we can support citizens to wherever they sit. So we're still dispersing payments by check, but we're trying to evolve to help people understand, how do you get that payment electronically, which over the years we have found is really the safest and most secure way to get your payment, especially when there's a disaster or some other type of thing. It's very difficult even though we work very well with Postal Service to try to deliver those payments, it becomes difficult to do that. On the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we have evolved with those different technologies. So you can see some of the dates are a little hard to read, but you can see the line there that shows direct deposit began in the 1970s. Maybe some of you don't remember a day without direct deposit, some of us do. And you can see at its peak, Treasury was delivering about 700 million checks each year. And then that's that, the green line is the total payments. The red line is the electronic payments. So you can see in the mid 70s, we started increasing our electronic, the number of our electronic payments and started decreasing the number of the check payments. And what we learned over the years in terms of trying to convince people to switch from checks to electronic is there's many reasons why it's challenging. But one of the biggest reasons, and you can see a big shift when we made the electronic payments mandate a little stronger, was that many people don't have a banking infrastructure to support the receipt of electronic payments. So we looked at that. We continue to look at the problems with the check payments. And what I'll talk about in a minute is the development of an account, a Treasury-sponsored account known as Direct Express, that could support the electronic delivery of a payment for people that didn't have bank account information. We also, as many of you have talked about here today, had to support whatever products we had with a very strong messaging campaign, which again, you can see how those electronic payments substantially increased with the onset in 2008 of our direct deposit campaign. So the campaign combined with the product really helped support the increase in the acceptance of electronic payments. So just again, to throw out a few numbers, last fiscal year, we dispersed 54 million checks totally out of 1.2 billion payments. Of that 54 million checks, only 15 million of them were benefit payments. The rest were tax refunds and other types of payments. And in 2008, to compare, before we had a product that could be used by people who didn't have main banking information, that banking accounts, we had dispersed benefit payments of using 143 million checks. So from 2008 to now, we were able to reduce that quite a bit by just making available a product that people could use if they didn't have access to mainstream banking. I keep asking this every year because as we've talked about the different fraud, it's pretty easy to do electronic banking fraud these days, despite all our law enforcement efforts. But we still know that there's more problems with checks than there are with electronic payments. So even though checks for Treasury dispersed payments constitute only 5% of our Treasury dispersed payments, 50% of our problems with these payments are check related. So of the 1.2 billion payments we disperse every year, about half of 1% require some sort of second touch. Maybe it goes to the wrong address, the wrong account, that kind of thing. But we still see that the bulk of those problems relate to checks as opposed to electronic payments. Here's a few more stats on the next slide. Paper checks are 11 times more likely to be lost or stolen, 30 times more likely for someone to call in and say, I didn't get my payment, and 30,000 Social Security SSI checks reported as lost or stolen in 2019. We work very closely with law enforcement to ensure that Treasury payments are protected from fraud. Now, so this, again, shows the decrease in the check payments for benefits. And I want to say, kind of taking this back to the economic impact payments, this is critical. The work we've done over the last 40 years really came to fruition in this last couple months when of those nearly 160 million payments that Fiscal Service helped IRS disperse for the EIPs, we were able to, 120 million of those were electronic payments. Now, many of them were based on the information that IRS had. So some might remember in the first 2 weeks after the CARES Act, we were able to disperse 80 million payments to people who had received their tax refund electronically. Again, due to the years and years and years of people encouraging the use of electronic payments. We then were able to, under the CARES Act, to use the bank account information that people had provided to the government for the purpose of receiving benefit payments. We were able to use that information to deliver the economic impact payment to those beneficiaries. So those beneficiaries were able to get those payments quickly and securely. So just a little bit on the Direct Express card program, and I'll quickly go through this. But you know, we do know this supports more than 4 million Americans who don't have another option. 53% of our Direct Express card holders are 50 and older, and most of the card holders are unbanked. This is their sole source of income, their benefit payment, and they are recipients of SSA or SSI, and SSI being about half of that. Next slide. So what do we do to mitigate fraud? Very important for us for any payment mechanism we use. How do we balance the protections, the fraud protections, but yet providing easy access to funds? Because what we learned with the Direct Express card program is for some people who have never had a bank account, this is the first time they're using a card product like this. And so to not to speed over this, but know that there are protections on there. We work very closely with law enforcement to make sure that people can access their funds, but kind of sticking with the theme here on the next slide. What's really important is the education. So we educate the community through blog posts, social media. We have a website, directexpress.info, which is really dedicated to the media, to community partners, to people that work in this field to help them understand, you know, what do we do to help educate our Direct Express cardholders in particular. We have a mobile app that allows for the sign up of texts, email alerts for deposits, transactions. We work with various partners, many of whom we worked with over the last couple months with the EIP. Some of you may have heard about the EIP card, which we use to deliver close to 4 million EIP payments. And due to the great education that we've all been doing, many people thought it was a scam. We had kind of the opposite problem. We had to tell people it wasn't a scam, and we were able to use the media and many of you on this call to help support that messaging and help get that word out. But one of the things we've been doing for several years is something called the Pay Perks program for Direct Express. And it consists of tutorials that people who are Direct Express cardholders can access on their mobile app. And the topics range: basics, budgeting, savings, privacy, security, how to not incur fees when you're doing your transactions, because there are a few fees for optional services on this card. And really teaching people who may have never had any of this information, you know, how to prevent fraud. We do have, you know, instances of what we call family-friendly fraud. You know, I give out my PIN to my son to go down the street, and next thing I know, you know, maybe that child has decided they could use my money for other things besides what I asked them to buy me. So I know this is quick, but I do want to leave time to show you how effective Pay Perks is, because we've all been talking about groups of people and the large numbers we've talked about, but really it does come down to each individual payee or constituent. And these videos are done by Pay Perks and MasterCard, and people volunteer for this, and you know, we don't pay them. This is not a paid ad, but this is really one of our Pay Perks users, and I think it's very important for this group to understand, as you do, because you're in it every day, how truly it reminds us how truly important the work that we do is to individuals. So we'll just end on this, and then I'll take any questions.
When the Pay Perks came into my life, they had these programs that with their incentive to win things and stuff like that. That was just on the side for me. I was more involved with the learning. I couldn't get enough of it at the start. It was real good. I don't know what else to say. It was like the best thing that ever happened, because I regained my confidence, and I just was blown away. You know, I couldn't believe how easy that was, you know. I'm far more aware, you know, I can see it coming now and suspect something, you know, a lot more easier than I was before. So in that regards, I'm more powerful, you know, and knowledge is power.
I think that sums up the day that we've been talking about this morning. Knowledge is power. So appreciate your time and happy to answer any questions.
All right, very good. I think we have time for a question if any council member has one for Rhonda. Okay, hearing none. Rhonda, thank you very much. That was, again, very informative, and thanks so much for the wonderful work that you're doing over there at the Treasury. So, council members, with that, I think we're going to head now towards adjournment. I want to thank everyone for participating today. I have to say it was very delightful to see all 15 federal agencies participate in today's Elder Justice Coordinating Council meeting. I think that's fabulous. As yet another reminder, any questions for council members or the public can be sent to EJCC@acl.hhs.gov. So again, an opportunity for the dialogue to continue. Again, I think it's been a fascinating discussion, and I want to acknowledge the time and effort that I know went into putting this meeting together, and then of course for all the speakers and the work that they have done to make sure that their remarks were ready. Obviously, we plan to post and share as appropriate. So again, more information available at acl.gov. You can go to our Elder Justice Coordinating Council site there for follow-up information to this meeting. So as a number of members have reinforced, and as I stated from the beginning, we felt like even during COVID, it was critical that the Elder Justice Coordinating Council convene. And of course, the focus now, more important than ever, on making sure that we address frauds and scams and what further we can do to assure the safety and enforce the rights of millions of older Americans and Americans with disabilities as they isolate or quarantine in their homes. And again, whether that's in communities or in congregate living settings, there's just so much criticality to the work that we do. And I know I learned a lot today. I took a couple pages of notes. I hope you did as well. So let me again call out my thanks to Mr. Matala and Ms. Fletcher for that initial kickoff. Thank you. Thank you. To Ms. Buckner, Mr. Burke, Ms. Greisman, Tony Bacon, Mr. Barksdale, and Mr. Herndon, again, for your updates and the new information. Some announcements incorporated in there. Thank you. That's always exciting. So again, I thought it was just a wonderful time together. And of course, thank you to Ms. Gunther and Ms. Kent for the presentations that both of you offered to really, again, stress both inside and outside of the federal government what we're doing to prevent financial exploitation before it happens. So again, thanks to all my fellow council members for your dedication to bringing a coordinated federal government response to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Certainly we have a committed group of people. I'm excited about our next meeting. I'm confident we're going to continue to do great things. And before I close, just so that all of you are aware, a couple of the things. Number one, meetings like this don't just magically happen. So as you know, it takes a team of people. So as you can see from this slide, and I'm going to flip over to make sure my team's putting it up. They are. Good deal. I really want to thank my colleagues who, again, worked very, very hard to make sure that this platform worked, to connect with all of you and your teams, and to make this meeting all that we wanted it to be. So again, you can see my colleagues listed on there, Aisha, Elizabeth, Stephanie, and others from the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services at the Administration for Community Living. Thanks so much for the hard work that they put into making this happen. And also another quick highlight for all of you, an announcement, if you will. The 2016 and 2018 Elder Justice Coordinating Council report, which all of you contributed to, is now finalized and has been sent to Congress. It's also available, of course, on our website at acl.gov. So again, appreciate the input that all of you provided, the work of your staff. This was a collaborative effort. Again, it reflects the outcomes of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council's work from 2016 to 2018. Obviously, that is a never-ending requirement, so we're working on the next one now. So again, I want to thank all of you for your participation. I want to thank all the attendees or participants who watched this remotely. As I mentioned from the beginning, I think we had 500 plus individuals that tuned in. I think that expresses an ongoing interest and engagement from so many who are grateful, I know, for the work. Me at the top of the list for the work of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council and what each of you are doing respectively within your agency. Obviously, a lot of the individuals that tuned in are the boots on the ground. So, you know, it's great to know that they're watching anxiously to see as their federal partner what we're doing. So again, with that, I'm going to go ahead then and close out this spring meeting of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to coming together again for the fall 2020 meeting. And with that, we adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at taxpayer expense.